Find Moreau, bring her to me. The rest don't matter.
You've watched Gen V Season 2 and felt the hair on the back of your neck stand up when Cipher smiled like he owned the campus. You sensed there was more to his interest in Marie than mentor energy or your usual Vought fetish for utilitarian cruelty. What you probably didn't expect, and what the show has been quietly assembling for you episode by episode, is that Cipher's plan isn't just to groom a powerful supe. It's to use Marie's blood as the literal key to resurrecting a dead man's psychic dream. Not a weapon in the cheap sense. Something far worse. A mindscape reborn, stitched together with trauma, memory, and biology. That dead man is Thomas Godolkin, and the project that never died with him is Odessa. Start with the obvious. Marie's ability is weird. Not in the stronger-than-usual supe way that Homelander or Soldier Boy sits on a throne of, but in a fundamentally different register. Her talent is intimately biological and mercurial. Blood moves when she wills it. It listens. It remembers. She can isolate a life force, calm it, accelerate it, and stop it. The visual language the show uses with her is always intimate. Close-ups of veins, the shimmer of plasma-like data, and the sounds of a heartbeat becoming musical. It reads like a poetic metaphor for trauma, yes, but it also reads like a spec sheet for something engineered. Because empathy and biology aren't usually fused into a weapon by accident. That's where the first breadcrumb sits, the recurring motif of data and resonance. Whenever Marie's powers spike, there's an overlay, a glint, a hum, a pattern that the show treats like interference. Not cinematic flair. The series treats those glitches as signals. They mirror imagery in the program files and lab footage, the camera frames in different scenes, and they sound the same. A low, digital hum that never plays for spectacle. It plays like an alarm. Why would blood manipulation come with digital signatures unless something in her physiology was written with code?
Odessa subjects were injected with compound V at the blastocyst stage. Very wasteful.
Why would her psychic bleedouts synchronize with archived lab audio unless the past had literally been hard-coded into the present? Which brings us to Godolkin. Before you think, oh great, another name-dropped B-list creep, remember who he was in the Gen V mythology.
Thomas Godolkin was devoted to developing ever more powerful supes. If you listen to me, that could be you.
The founder, the man whose brand became the institution that hides sordid experiments beneath a veneer of campus life. It's convenient to imagine Thomas Godolkin as a wealthy benefactor whose real legacy is a building. Gen V insists on something else. The show places his research in the narrative like a bank of buried servers. Old, corrupt, but still humming. Odessa is not a single lab note or a botched experiment. In the rules of this story, Odessa is a program, a conceptual architecture that sought to rewrite what Compound V could do. Not just grant strength, but translate experience into biology. Project Odessa's conceit, as the plot teases, is this: take psychic patterns, emotional signatures, and neural imprints, and find a vehicle to store and transmit them. Compound V changed bodies. Odessa aimed to cord together minds. The missing link they were after wasn't some speculative psychokinetic generator, it was a medium. And for Godolkin's team, that medium turned out to be blood. Cells, damaged and repaired, can carry epigenetic marks. Biology remembers stress. So could blood, the show whispers, be trained to carry not only instructions for protein expression, but also the ghostly residues of thought? If you can encode a memory trace into cells, you can, in theory, pass on more than gene expression. You pass on the residue of experience. What makes Cipher's plan so horrifying is that he understands the poetry of Odessa as a technical manual. Cipher isn't theatrical like a classic villain. He's clinical. He's the kind of antagonist who treats people like test cases because paperwork reads better with living variables. To him, Marie is an elegant problem, a living API. He doesn't flinch when she's in pain, that would be sentiment. He flinches when she's unstable, because an unstable server corrupts the archive. His whole posture across the season is that of a caretaker puppet master. He nudges, he tests reactions, and he warms her up like a device getting pre-calibrated for a ritual that's disguised as a procedure. But why Marie? Why blood? Why resurrect Godolkin's dream with her, specifically? Two connected reasons. First, ancestry and the split memory motif the show has threaded since Season 1. And second, the uniqueness of her power as a bridge between biology and subjectivity. Marie's childhood trauma is a narrative engine: guilt, orphanhood, and the messy aftermath of a power that literally killed. The show uses that trauma to humanize her, to make her an agent of sympathy, but it also uses it as a conduit. That trauma is the codebook Odessa was missing. Godolkin's early tests looked for subjects whose emotional imprint could act as an encoding force. Trauma produces stable, repeatable neurochemical signatures. The very thing that makes Marie tragic also makes her a precise signal. Her sorrow is a waveform. Cipher recognizes that signal and, far from being repelled, is drawn to the utility of pain. Second, Marie's ability doesn't merely manipulate blood, it interfaces with life. She can pull a thread of someone's vitality, and in the show's visual language, that's the same as pulling at their narrative. In the universe of Gen V, identity is not abstract. Identity is a pattern of biochemical events. If you can alter the pattern at scale, you alter what a person knows or believes or feels. Odessa's theoretical promise was to take that idea from theory to instrument. But to weaponize that instrument, to return Godolkin as a subjective force rather than a dead man's notes, you need a host capable of blending body and mind. Again, Marie fits. Cipher's method is not theatrical resurrection, it's puppet resurrection. He isn't looking to make a zombie of Thomas Godolkin. He wants Godolkin emergent, a sentient pattern reconstructed by the resonance of encoded blood lives. Picture this. Godolkin's mind exists as a fractured archive across Odessa's old servers and corrupted test records, audio clips, neural readouts, childhood lullabies, and lab transcripts. Alone, those artifacts are inert. But stitch them into a biological lattice that can broadcast and receive a living transmitter, and those artifacts can be reconstituted into a subjective presence. Cipher wants that reconstitution. He's read Godolkin more like a dead author to be reperformed than a man to be revived. Bring the words to life, and the author returns in a new form. Now follow the breadcrumbs in the show. The surveillance footage that flickers exactly when Marie's powers spike. The Thaddeus-like camera glitches that the editing lets sit long enough for you to feel confused, then compels you to remember them later as evidence. The symbolic lullaby that appears in a cipher loop. The lab notebooks that use terms like neural echo and resonant imprint. These aren't stylistic beats, they're wiring. If you look at Cipher's behavior, his patience, his manipulation of Marie's exposure levels, his willingness to let her panic so that a raw frequency rips through her, he's not training a soldier, he's breeding a crucible. He wants the frequency to break the membrane between the archived mind and the living host. There is a moral calculation here that deserves attention. Godolkin, as the show implies, wanted harmony through assimilation. The dystopian idea that if human minds were connected, conflict would be engineered away. It's a classic technocratic fantasy, a single benevolent intelligence smoothing history into order. Cipher, however, is not benevolent. If Godolkin's ideal imagined peace, Cipher imagines transcendence. The resurrected Godolkin would not simply govern. He would be worshipped, functionalized, and distributed. Cipher's plan is thus a perverse hybrid. It is at once the conclusion of Godolkin's dream and the inversion of it. The god would no longer be a mind imprisoned in a body or a server. It would be a dispersed phenomenon enacted through blood. The body becomes scripture. The bloodstream becomes transmission protocol. Crucially, Cipher's strategy is patient. He's not trying to coerce Marie into a single act and be done. He's engineering a cascade. Everyone in his web must act as a chorus. Marie bleeds. The blood carries encoded traces. Nearby subjects absorb resonance. Their mental states flip just enough to populate Godolkin's missing scenes. Over time, repetition reinforces the reconstituted pattern. The more people touch the signal, the more complete the subjective field becomes. Resurrection by diffusion rather than a single incantation. Slow burn, resurrective contagion. That's the cruelty and the genius in one. It's almost undetectable, because it exploits the human tendency to normalize strange feeling shifts. Are you more empathetic? More angry? More inclined to recall a childhood scene you never lived? You think you're remembering. You're being stitched. And because this is Vought, every grotesque idea is immediately given a bureaucratic sheen. Odessa's papers would have framed the experiment as humanitarian. synchronization for trauma, remediation, and collective therapeutic memory. Language is comforting in a malevolent way. The practical upshot is that Vought could pitch this to governments as a way of stabilizing post-conflict regions, then quietly monetize it under the pretense of development. Cipher doesn't need world domination then. He needs legitimacy. A resurrected Godolkin used as a tool for shepherding public opinion and behavior. That's influence in pure form. Pause and consider what that would do to the world of the boys. The Seven are not only celebrities, they are nodes of narrative authority. If Godolkin's emergent mind can tune those nodes through blood resonance, you don't need coercion or traditional propaganda. You get a population synchronized by instinct. The Seven stop being tyrants. They become organs of a distributed organism. Resistance becomes a glitch not only in policy, but also in physiology. The show raises this through small beats. A song recorded in a lab that puts a whole wing into stillness. A camera footage splice that makes one cadet break into tears without motive. These are not random aberrations. They're pilot symptoms of a system waking to life. The other ingredient in Cipher's plan is dramaturgy. He doesn't resurrect Godolkin quietly, because resurrection is theater. He primes an arc that will convincingly return meaning to the dead man's project. So he chooses Marie not only because of her biocompatibility, but because her narrative is narratively fraught. Guilt, loss, and a missing sister. A host narrative that invites filling. Godolkin's emergent self would need a myth to tether it to the world, and Marie's suffering provides that mythic scaffold. Cipher isn't insensitive. He's strategic. He wants the world to give Godolkin a role that looks like redemption, because redemption sells obedience far better than fear. This is why the show's quieter scenes matter. Don't skip the moment where Marie stares at her reflection and a memory flickers. Don't skip the instance when the mentor figure laughs off a trauma as development. Those micro scenes function as narrative inoculations. They prepare the viewer and the characters to accept the resurrection as a plausible meaning-making event. That's craft. That's propaganda 101. There is, of course, a counterweight to Cipher's design, agency. The show seeds a potential defeat early, and it's almost heartbreakingly human. If Cipher's plan depends on frequency and diffusion, then the obvious Achilles heel is a break in transmission, an individual who refuses to be a receptor. If someone like Marie detaches, if she learns to modulate what she transmits and to quarantine the signal, she becomes not the key, but the firewall. The show gestures at this when Marie edges into choice, saving a classmate instead of letting ability rip, pausing before a destructive act, and looking at Cipher and not obeying the nudge. Those moments are framed as tiny revolutions, because in a world built on the concatenation of small choices, a single no can short the relay. Add to that the human factor of Butcher and Homelander's arcs being whispered into this ecology. Butcher, who has been both infected and weaponized by Compound V in different ways, offers us the brutal utility of grit. His arc has always been pain as an instrument against the system. Homelander is, of course, the monstrous emblem of raw super authorship, charisma plus impunity. Where both of them fit into Cipher's plan is cunning. They are both threats and unwitting accelerants. A destabilized Homelander makes for a rich testing field for Odessa's psychic parameters. Butcher, with his knowledge and rage, is the type who can pry at the seams. He can force a reveal that turns wave into wakeful surf. Gen V teases that these adult players will not only oppose Cipher but also be leveraged by him, because a reconstituted Godolkin needs complex human antagonisms to feel alive. Resurrection is dialectic. You can see the narrative pattern. Cipher wants a psychic god born of blood and trauma. Godolkin created the blueprint. Marie provides both the physiological medium and the mythic scaffolding. It's the perfect storm of science turned ritual. What the show asks, softly, insistently, is whether the language of personhood can survive a world where memories are transferable and identities can be overwritten. When blood carries meaning, when your sister's scream is encoded into your veins, what remains of free will? That's the philosophical torque at the heart of Cipher's plan. Better to control desire than to coerce action. Better to seed recollection than to fabricate truth. The result is more total, more insidious, because it doesn't require chains. People will line up to join a resurrection, if it feels like salvation. So what's the defense? For now, the shape of resistance the show offers is painfully human. Memory, refusal, and the stubborn persistence of messy biography. Marie's sister, that narrative ghost the show keeps circling, functions thematically, but also practically. If a mind like Anne's was archived and splintered, reuniting that self requires consent that Godolkin and Cipher assume they can fake. The tragedy the story hints at is that the cost to consent is too high. Literal lives, individual autonomy, and the ethics of what it means to honor a dead person by making them live through others. That's why the final beats of the season feel less like a battle and more like an ultimatum. Will the narrative allow the resurrection? Will the world opt for an engineered god over messy human ruin? That's the price list Cipher puts on his plan. He's not asking for worship. He's asking for an arrangement in which the resurrected Godolkin's mind is distributed and hospitable. In exchange, Vought offers stability, safety, and a sanitized history. The elevator pitch literally writes itself. If Cipher succeeds, the world doesn't simply change. It becomes a hymn. People will recite a history that mirrors the God Brain's narrative. The Seven will be not just supes with PR teams, but organs in a larger organism whose rhythms match Godolkin's emergent will. Resistance will become a biological noise that can be damped out. That is what worse than anyone expected looks like. A system that remakes humanity from the inside out without the theatrics of conquest. The show wisely gives us a counterimage. The intimate, ragged humanity of those who remember their scars and refuse to let them be repurposed. That's where Gen B finds its moral center. Cipher's plan is elegant and terrible. It is an idea that makes the skin crawl because it's plausible in the universe the show has created, a world in which corporations already privatize life and death. It's scary because it's a continuation of old Vought logic. Why kill a people when you can narrate them into submission? So when you watch the season again, or wait for the next one, listen for the hum. Watch for the micro glitches when someone's eyes flicker a beat too long. Follow the blood for the story it tries to tell. The breadcrumbs are there, and they lead, with terrible logic and hypnotic cunning, to Cipher's plan. He planned to create a god by writing a dead man's mind into living veins. That's the kind of horror that doesn't scream, it whispers, and the whisper becomes the only truth some people will ever know.